Good evening, good morning, a very warm welcome on behalf of the Harvard Business School Club of India and the Harvard Business School India Research Center to all of you joining us from around the world. The large number of guests that we have today, over 300, is testimony to the star power of both speakers that we have today. It's my privilege to introduce Ranjay Gulati, Paul R. Lawrence Professor at Harvard Business School, former unit head of the organizational unit behavior unit, the chair of the HBS AMP program, and a frequent guest on CNBC as well. Ranjay is an expert on leadership, strategy, organizational issues in firms. His recent work explores the role of business in society and the link between performance and purpose, how organizations can revolutionize their operations by embedding deep purpose, become high growth companies, and benefit all stakeholders. While Ranjay's research on courageous leadership is inspiring, what's even more inspiring is working with him. We've just completed a case study with him on the Mahindra and Mahindra Group, which is central to his research on the link between performance and purpose. And this leads me to introduce our second speaker for today, Anand Mahindra, HBS MBA 1981, chairman of the Mahindra Group, the executive chairman of Mahindra and Mahindra Limited, and the non-executive chairman of Tech Mahindra Limited. Anand's tenure has seen the group expand domestically and internationally into a range of major industrial sectors, from automobiles and agriculture to IT and aerospace. Anand is known as a global leader. He served on several influential bodies globally and is currently on the board of Invest India. He's been named one of the top 30 chief executives worldwide and one of the world's 50 greatest leaders. India has honored him with the Padma Bhushan and the French president with the Knight in the National Order of the Legion of Honor. In addition, Anand is an incisive business commentator and humanitarian. He has over 8 million followers on Twitter. Among his many social change initiatives is the Nanhi Kali program, which over 20 years has provided over 330,000 underprivileged girls access to high quality education. Anand was the founder of the HBS Club of India, in those days known as the HBS Association. The Harvard Business School India Research Center owes a special debt to Anand. He hosted us the research center for its first decade at Mahindra Towers. And the Harvard Business School Research Center and me personally will be ever grateful to Anand, not just for his generosity, but for his advice and mentorship. With that, over to you, Ranjay and Anand.
Anjali, thank you so much. I have to say, Anjali is a very special member of the Harvard Business School community. She has made sure that the India Research Center stays front and center for all of us. So a big thank you, Anjali, for all that you do for all of us. So thank you so much. Anand, a warm welcome, and it's wonderful to see you again and have a chance to have this conversation with you. I'm just going to dive right in. Anand, first of all, I really enjoyed writing that case about Mahindra and learning more from you. And I have to owe a debt of gratitude to you because when I began this research, I met you and you passed on to me Collins and Porras's old HBR article, said, Ranjay, go and read this. And that set me on a journey. So I am grateful to you for what ended up becoming a book. Let's dig right in. The world is on the cusp of a war. Businesses are being forced to take positions on a geopolitical issue. And this is part of a larger movement going on, that a larger debate, if you will, about business in what Larry Fink has described in his recent letter as saying stakeholder capitalism is capitalism. What are your thoughts on, not on the current conflict, but more generally about the idea that business today needs to be more tuned into a range of stakeholders, not just the shareholders?
Sure. And I should, first of all, thank Anjali for that glowing introduction. And I apologize. I apologize to the people on this call. The length of her introduction had nothing to do with me. But thank you again, Anjali. And thank you, Ranjay, for that introduction again and for your words about our friendship, which I completely echo. Coming to your question, As you know, we are going to be talking about purpose, performance, and purpose. So, any company that has any pretension to a purpose of any consequence cannot divorce itself from what's going on in the world, what's going on in your immediate community, what's going on in the larger community. And if I have to look back and reflect on how this change has occurred or how this state came to be, I think when I look back, I believe 2007, 2008, that was a seminal point when the Occupy Wall Street movement took place, and when it became very apparent to every corporation in the world that consumers really did not trust large companies. There was an enormous trust deficit, and that phrase became very popular. That trend has continued and has continued at a very rapid rate, where there is enormous expectations from companies to be integrated with communities, to be aware, to be conscious, to be not saying to themselves that the only preoccupation I have is of maximizing shareholder return. And I dare say that COVID has put that whole argument to rest. In a post-COVID world, it's become extremely clear that all consumers are looking to corporations for being much more active and conscientious members of the community. I don't think there's any going back from that right now, Ranjay. Everybody is going to have to do this. Now, you can ask yourself, so what should they be doing? Should they be commenting on every situation? Well, not everyone is a media organization. You're not a paper or a media company that has to take an editorial stance. And I would say the world is a very complicated place today. There are many, many opinions. It's a multipolar world. There are enormous views, different views from different countries and different ethnicities. But when it comes to issues where there is a very clear black and white distinction, where there is good and bad, which is obvious, or as we see today, the difference, stark difference between good and evil, I do believe companies have to come out and make clear what their position is. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry for the whole
And
mouthful
no,
of words.
Anand, I think is what do you have to say to people, critics of this argument, who say no, a business leader's job is to focus on shareholder value, and all this social reallocation is the job of elected government officials, that business should not intrude in trying to redistribute resources. It's not their job to tell shareholders, I'm going to take from you and I get to decide where I'm going to allocate those resources. How does one reconcile that? And how does one even sell that to shareholders and saying, we're not going to have the kind of returns you expected, but because we're going to be doing these other things that really we believe are important for society?
I have perhaps a very simplistic view of it. When you define the trade-off in that manner, that we have to tell consumers that you're not going to get the returns that you expected, we have to ask ourselves, over what time frame are you making that judgment? My argument would be very simple. I would tell shareholders that unless we show that we are clear in our outlook, in our conscience, and in our sense of purpose when it comes to very stark issues of good and bad, as I said, what is good and bad for the world or for your community right next to you. If we don't take a stand, consumers are going to vote with their wallets and move away from you. So your returns are arguably going to come down. So in a funny way, Ranjay, I think what we have to tell shareholders is that what we are doing in the long run is in fact the best remedy for, or the best solution for maximizing shareholder returns. It's a question over what time frame. You may take an immediate hit because of a certain decision, as some companies are doing today, but what you have to convince shareholders is that in the long run, you are going to get consumers voting in your favor with their wallets.
So this is a long-term play. So the idea is, so in the short, you're willing to say that, look, short-term hit, but for pain, for long-term gain. So there's a
Absolutely.
time horizon baked into this argument very, very, very clearly. Is that right in your mind?
Yes, that's absolutely.
Yeah. Now, Anand, just to build on that idea a little bit, Recently you saw Spotify having a big kind of controversy in the US, but the point was it wasn't the customers who were rebelling, it was employees. It was employees saying unacceptable.
No, absolutely right. And so, in a sense, that word stakeholder comes up because it's equally important to make sure that your associates in your company have a commitment to your company, give off their best, outperform, excel. When will they do that? Why will they do that? And I think that uh, topic, in fact, is going to be one of the central uh, pivots of our conversation today. But the question is, you also will not maximize shareholder returns if the associates in your company, your colleagues, are not aligned, if they are not aligned to your aspirations, if they are not coming into work every day because they believe in your purpose, then again, over time, you are not going to deliver superior financial returns.
I'm about to go into purpose in a second, but I wanted to, you mentioned COVID in a moment ago. Tell us personally, how has COVID reshaped you as a leader and as a human being? What has it meant for you? We're still not out of it. What has this meant for you?
Uh, well, it's affected everyone deeply. Uh, I don't believe there's anyone in any country. Uh, Very few countries have escaped COVID completely. So I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had a certain emotional casualty, I would call it, in their lives. In other words, knows somebody or has a relative who has succumbed to COVID. So all of us have been deeply shaken. But the way it affected me, really, Ranjay, was that I began. First, let me talk about my own company. I remember that when it started out, and I issued a call for our people to try and answer the needs of the day, which at that point in time were ventilators and the portable ventilators, what we call ambu bag ventilators. And I remember in 4 days, and I literally mean in 4 days, our engineers who were in the plant, and the plant had stopped making vehicles, but they in 4 days just camped out at the factory and turned out a rudimentary prototype of a ventilator which we were willing to offer to the medical institution. I I knew what our people were capable of. It's not that I had any doubts, but I was stunned by how a common cause, the right cause, can make people do extraordinary things, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. That was the first incredible lesson I learned, which is going to, of course, uh, have tremendous benefits for all of us in our companies, that realization of what we are capable of. But the second thing, and the far more emotional thing for me in India, how it that affected me, was when, particularly in the city of Mumbai, but in every metro in India, we saw after the lockdown was declared by Prime Minister Modi, we saw migrant workers leave cities. It's interesting, nobody had any idea of the quantity or the number of people who were migrant workers in India. There just wasn't data on that. And it just became extraordinarily apparent when we saw them marching, sometimes barefoot, getting back to their villages. What it brought back to me was how remarkably interdependent we are. So the lesson of interconnectedness came home in a very stark manner. You can talk about it when you talk about global supply chains. But when you see people migrating and your entire quality of life evaporating in front of your eyes, you then realize that people who you took for granted, people at the bottom of the pyramid, how important they were to you and how they created a quality of life for the entire society, that came home to me very hard. So those, Ranjay, I would say, are the two very big lessons I learned.
Anand, very well put. Actually, we call them invisible workers. These are workers who are doing work but is invisible to most of us, or we take it for granted, but is really invisible. And I think that's extremely well said. I want to turn to purpose, since you brought up purpose as well. So let's going back in time. In 2011, you decide that Mahindra and Mahindra needs a new core purpose, or at least a new one. Now, you happen to have one. In 1997, you had come up with one, and you had one going back to 1945. So, what was this idea that a business, a successful business, needs to come out and officially state a kind of a refresh of their purpose, if you will?
Well, you gave me a cue for for how I start my response to you, Ranjay, when you referred to that article that I talked to you about Jim Collins, and I think it was HBR 96, and it was about building your company's vision. I was very struck by that article. I just happened to read it, and it sort of hit me like a sledgehammer. And it was a wonderful article because it wasn't didactic, it wasn't academic. It talked about real life stories. It talked very, in a very sort of powerful way about Sony Corporation and how Akio Morita, on the ashes of Hiroshima almost, decided that he was going to redeem his nation's image and reputation in the world with a new war, a war which was benign, a war about showing that Japan could make the best products in the world. And at that time, right after the war, Japan was known for making very shoddy products, which embarrassed him. So he made a vow standing there at that time, post war, that in 50 years, Japan would be known for the best products, best product quality in the world. And as we all know, he did it in a much shorter time frame. But the power of the idea, the power of mission, just came to me. And I just felt, oh my God, we don't have one. And so that's when I talked to some key colleagues of mine, and we started a process that eventually took us 9 months to try and find a purpose. And what we really were happy about was we said we went, quote unquote, back to the future because we found we didn't need to invent one. And we looked at the first advertisement of the company, which was formed in 1945, 2 years before independence. Ironically, on the same day of Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. Now, keep in mind, Gandhi wasn't martyred. He wasn't a national hero or the father of the nation by then. So just serendipitously, we were born. Our company was registered on October 2nd, 1945. And the company was called Mahindra and Muhammad, started by my grandfather, granduncle, and a friend of theirs, a Muslim friend of theirs. And keep in mind, this was at a time when communalism was at its peak and Muslims and Hindus were slaughtering each other. And their statement was about being a secular company, about peace, commitment to building a new India. Their first ad had nothing to do with products. It had to do with principles. So what we discovered, Ranjay, was that although I read the article, felt a gap, in the process we discovered that we were really going back to our founder's vision. So we've had a continuum of purpose. But coming back to what you said in 2007, what happened was that in 1999, roughly, when we articulated the first, or let me call it the core purpose as we defined it, we said Indians are second to none. So we were, in a sense, going down the route of Sony and Morita and saying that we have suffered from the shackles of colonialism, a huge lack of self-confidence, an inferiority complex, a national inferiority complex. We're going to prove that we can sit at the high table with anyone when it comes to manufacturing of products. And that worked. I think that worked. It got people motivated, it got people mobilized, it turned into good results. And then the problem was we grew. We became a multinational. And we had a number of people. We had people in China, we had people in Korea, we had people in the US. Now, why would they come to work every day to prove that Indians were second to none? And this was told to me by a young American intern we had. And he came in and he said, I see why it's energizing a lot of people, but Anand, why will it energize me? That's when we began the search for another one. And serendipitously, and I'll pause there to allow you to, I'm going on to focus your question, but that's when we came to looking for a new purpose, which ended up with Rise.
Yeah. So, Anand, as an academic, I want to say to you that, what I found interesting about mission statements had become kind of an artifact of the past. kind of a wallpaper. Everybody had one. They kind of put it out there on the wall. Nobody took mission statements seriously anymore. I mean, we always say there's the what and the how, right? What am I going to do and how am I going to get it done? Build a strategy, build an execution of strategy. This why question that sits above it, it almost felt academic to most people. It had become kind of a idea. It's an academic. I don't want to. Academic sounds bad. I don't want to make it sound bad. We're not as bad as people think we are. But why is the why question so important? How does it inform the what and the how, or is it just kind of an inspirational slogan to get people excited? What is the purpose of purpose, if you will?
I'm just going to go back to what I said in answer to an earlier question of yours about how post-COVID, this is almost a rhetorical question. Because in a strange way, that pandemic has shown to everybody, not just to millennials, but to everybody, that they need to ask themselves, why were they working? Why did they go into work? Because you were divorced from your work, you were working from home, sometimes work was shut down, you were confronted with mortality. And not everybody is used to becoming a existentialist and reading Sartre and Camus and confronting your mortality every day. We don't do that. Human beings are, in a sense, in denial completely. They are in denial about the fact that eventually they're not going to be on this planet. That's how life has worked. But COVID forced us to confront that brutal reality, that we are mortal, and that we have to understand in the short time we have here, why are we working? What is our objective in working? What is our objective in anything in life? I don't believe the end of the pandemic will mean the end of that questioning. So I think things have changed forever, and that why has become increasingly important. And if you don't answer the why, and if you don't help people who join your company in finding a why, they are going to be out the door very quickly.
So this ties into the great resignation and what's going on. People are calling it the great reshuffle, a lot of questioning going on. I call it the great rethink. There's a lot of kind of angst in people's minds. How does a company, and we'll come to this in a second, get an employee who is thinking about their own purpose, life purpose, my own purpose in life, to the company's purpose, and finds resonance between those two? Is that the idea? Then the ideal is that when I come to work, it's not work and life. I'm not segregating or compartmentalizing my existence. I'm saying my work is a part of who I am, and I want to find meaning in my work. Is that where you're going with this, Anand?
Well, it'd be hard to match your eloquence in answering that question. In fact, your question contained the answer in itself. And you're right, Ranjay. I'll just echo what you said. That what was this notorious phrase all the time? Work-life balance. Look at that phrase, how pernicious it is. Because hidden in that phrase is a presumption that the two are contrary. That's why you need a balance. If two are in different elements of the weighing scale, they need a balance. And it perpetuated that dichotomy. What we are saying, what you are saying, I think, what I'm saying is that cannot be a dichotomy. That dichotomy is the source of angst, the source of tension and stress in your life. When the two are different, you're constantly trying to balance them. Think of how powerful one's life would be if your work was fully integrated with your purpose, if somehow it helped you answer that question. Otherwise, there was always, my work does this, and my private life allows me to become spiritual or to go on a journey, to hike around the world, to be of service to people. Let's say service to people. But what if you worked in a company where every day you went into work and you were of help to people? Your work transformed lives. Your work helped people rise. Let me give you an example. My first executive assistant many years ago, a decade ago or so, was from HBS, Shantanu. And when he finished his 4-year stint with my office as an executive assistant, He's still with our group, and he's gone into helping create a new company called Mahindra Rural Housing Finance. Now, here's a Harvard Business School guy. He could have gone to a merchant bank. He could have gone to a private equity player. He could have tried some other startup. He stuck with us because every day when I talk to him, he feels fulfilled. He goes out into the boondocks. He helps people repair their homes. He gives them loans for building, very modest houses. And he sees the smiles on their faces when the roof goes on to the top and is over their heads. And he said, that's what makes me happy every day. And I've learned a lot from Shantanu because I said, if we can give everyone meaning at work like Shantanu is deriving, my God, we'll be unstoppable.
In the beginning, when you began, though, Anand, you had to sell this to your board and to your to people in your organization. What was your pitch to them? That listen, let me tell you why we need a purpose, and what was the pushback that you had to overcome, if any?
I don't think there was any resistance. Let me clarify. You're talking about when we did Rise. Am I
Rise,
right,
yes,
Ranjay? Yeah.
yes.
So at that point in time, if you look at it as a point in history, you yourself, as you noticed, we had already defined one purpose since '99. And I had already shown how that purpose itself was not something foreign or alien to Mahindra, that we were formed and we gave birth from a purpose. So both the associates, colleagues, as well as the board were aware of that. They were aware that we had started life as a company with purpose, that we had had one reformulation of it in '99. I think, to be honest, that first purpose worked, but it was not something that has embedded itself into people's bloodstreams as Rise has. So maybe the board thought, okay, this is one more thing. It's a reformulation again. It will be benign. And so there wasn't any resistance, neither from the board nor from the people in the company. If anything, there might have been puzzlement, some bemusement. What is this? What is Rise? Why are we going away from Indians as second to none? Oh, yes, we are multinational, but what does Rise mean and who's going to rise? So there were questions. I don't think there was resistance of any kind. And keep in mind also that I had earned some equity for myself because I had taken what was seen as a ridiculous bet in 2002 to build this SUV, the Scorpio, which we had never built a vehicle of that sophistication. It worked beyond our wildest dreams. We had also created the Blue Chip Conference every year when our results were at their nadir. And we had then shown a remarkable period of financial growth in our financial results from 2002 to 2007. Yes, of course, the Great Recession had come on, but we had done very well in quote unquote normal times. So that equity is what allowed me to push ahead, I would say.
So tell us, what is Rise, Anand? I think people need to understand, like not only how you came up with it, but in your mind, what was Rise, and then how was it translated into the organization? And there are also we can talk about the Rise principles as well.
Well, I'll try and give a quick recapitulation of how it came about because it's an interesting story. That serendipitously, as we were realizing that the half life of the first Indians are second to none core purpose was over, along comes a gentleman called Scott Goodson from New York, an advertising agency, who had been recruited by our dealer in the US through whom we had wanted to market pickup trucks. So he came on a very humble mission, simply to look at the company and then go back and create ads for trade magazines for selling our pickups. And he asked to see me at the end of his stay here. And I thought it was a half an hour meeting, turned into a couple of hours because he walked in and he said, Anand, you have no idea what kind of company you have. And when anyone tells me something like that, something outrageous, gets my attention. And he told me, he said, I walk around and he said, the people in your company are either they're extraordinary individuals with a transcending sense of purpose, or they're smoking something illegal. And he started telling me that, I talk to your farm people, the tractor people, and they say we are in a sense initiating the next green revolution of India. We are not building tractors. It's like the old story, the common one about the bricklayer who says he's building a cathedral, etc. And he told me this story. He said it's from your company, and everyone I've talked to has that sense of mission. And then he told me, but he said, you need a purpose, a newer one, because he knew we both understood the fragility of the purpose at that time, the incumbent one. And he had a very interesting point, very practical one. He said, that you need a purpose which becomes a movement. It cannot be a tagline. Like you said, it can't be something that just goes on the shelf, motherhood and apple pie statement. He said, you need something that becomes a movement. But he said, movements exist outside you. You have to be able to understand what that movement is and then become a champion of it. It's very rare when you can go out and create the movement yourself. I thought that was very wise, very appreciative, very practical. He wasn't sitting there telling me create a movement. He said, learn what movement is happening outside and then join that and lead it. And he actually predicted Occupy Wall Street. It was a year before. And he said, I'm telling you there is a trust deficit. People want to believe in companies like yours where the people are imbued with a passion and sense of purpose. And then I went along with him and I said, well, help us do it. And to be honest, they came out. His agency, working with our HR team, came out with this phrase Rise and the Rise Manifesto. And it just clicked. It clicked with all of us. And I'll stop there, and go down whichever
very well,
direction you
nice
want.
story, and I'm glad you were able to share that with everybody. I think people should hear that. I want people to still understand that once you are rolling out, so let's say you got Rise, you develop a set of principles. When you roll out something like this in the organization, how is it different than a typical corporate culture initiative or strategy initiative, some kind of team building initiative? What makes this kind of different? Because now you're trying to communicate something more fundamental to everybody, that no, this is not about behaviors, this is not about strategy, this is actually about who we are.
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer. And number two, the journey is not over. So if anyone came and told you that, we have reached the pinnacle now, what you can do in terms of infusing that purpose and that understanding of Rise into everybody, no, we are not there. We will still have a long journey, and it may be a never-ending journey. But we did succeed remarkably. And I would say that the reason is, first, as I told you, just by DNA, we are a company that understands purpose, that was created out of one. So whenever I felt anyone questioning it or having some kind of confusion about it, I would hark back to that first ad. And I kept it here just to sort of check on it, because there are lines. This was in 1945. It's something I've shared with you. It said Mahindra and Mohammed. And this is an ad in the Times of India, and it says, a significant combination which represents what might well be termed a cooperative effort to secure for India that development so indispensable to the full realization of her future dreams. And then it goes on to talk about the encouragement of private enterprise, the initiative of the individual. It talks about not indulging in cartels, about the acceptance of ability being the sole test of merit. This is 1945. This is 1945 when people were talking like this, the founders of the company. So I would just say to people who said, what is Rise? What is a purpose? I would hold this up and I would say, look, what was that? That was about helping India rise, about helping the ordinary person rise. So what are you confused about? This company was founded on those principles. So it became easy for me because I could relate it back to an abiding legacy. It was not completely alien. It was not something out of the blue. And people said, oh my God, you're right. 1945, that's what it is. So that's what Rise is all about. So I found a narrative, really, which helped me translate that to people.
So Anand, one of the questions I was periodically been asked about this topic of purpose is, how do you measure progress? Like, how do you put KPIs around it? how do you make sure that we are actually tracking towards being a purpose-driven organization? In your mind, was it about behaviors? Was it about actions? What does that mean exactly when you say, are we living up? Are we living Rise?
The way in which we measure this will probably change with every new head of HR that we get. People have different perceptions of how to measure. And I personally have a little bit of skepticism about trying to quantify things in this respect here. If you are trying to quantify it and if you have to hold up data to validate where you are on the journey, I think you've lost the battle. I prefer it when people come to me, people who are new. And we've had a new person come in just recently and take charge of this, of our brand. And the first thing she says is, I have no doubt that people believe in this, that there is a sense of belief. Everyone I've talked to, when I ask them, what is this company about? I'm a new person here, tell me about this. What is the first story you hear? To me, Ranjay, forget the data and the quantification. The first thing is, if somebody comes in and asks anyone in Mahindra, tell me a story about Mahindra. And if Rise doesn't figure in that, in the majority of people, then I think we would have failed. But let me stop there again so that we can go down the path you want.
I think, Anand, one thing that I wanted to also explore with you is that, Mahindra is many businesses, very distinct businesses. And as I understood the rollout of Rise as a concept, even, you allowed it to be translated into each business in their own way. Um, because you can't say this is not a forced mandate saying, here are the 5 principles, memorize them, here are the KPIs, we're going to hold you to it. You allowed there to be some kind of exploration of their own. How did that play out, if you will, where you want to have some consistency but also allow some freedom?
Yeah, it's a very complex problem. You're right that you're hitting on, and it comes to the it sort of addresses the fundamental belief I have about the structure of organizations or of a multi-business group. But I won't go down that. I could talk about federations and autonomy and empowerment all day. But you're right that I had to find a way of propagating this new purpose within a company structure or an organization, group structure, which was highly autonomous, highly empowered. The sector heads were really running their own company. And there were very few non negotiables in terms of the control by the corporation. Apart from, but accounting and HR, human resources, were the two areas where I always, from the time in 94 when I first articulated this structure, those were the two where I insisted that every company in our group have a dotted line to the corporate HR head and the corporate accounting head. Apart from that, people really had a huge amount of freedom and discretion. So I knew that even though HR was a dotted line, when you want to change a belief system, then autonomy, empowerment, exploration become even more important. People have to taste it, they have to feel it, they have to say, do I believe it? Because just saying that, yes, we will do it, didn't mean anything. I'll again give you one story is always better than trying to propound some theory. When we first started, we had the HR head was very frustrated with Tech Mahindra, which was the IT company. Now, interestingly, the IT company has 50% of the entire population of people in our group. Today, it's 140,000 people are just in the IT company. That time, it was around maybe 80,000 people. And the head of HR was very frustrated because the CEO of that IT company was a very individualistic, very much a self-starter, shaping the company in the direction and image he wanted. And initially, our HR head felt he was not really playing a ball with him. Because whenever he'd do an LSIP, this large scale process, whenever he'd do some kind of gathering to talk about Rise, to propagate it, sometimes the CEO of that company would be missing in action. And he felt that this person was really just not, being a team player. 2 years later, we found that the whole principle of Rise was being used the most by Tech Mahindra, both internally as well as for consumers. Because they experimented, they played around, and they found, as the fifth largest IT company in the country, how do you differentiate yourself in that business? Just by being cheaper, being more efficient, when you're giving what in those days was around getting people to write software for international clients. How do you differentiate yourself? And they found that Rise was becoming a differentiator both in recruitment of the best talent here, as well as in differentiating themselves with customers. So they would go in, and if somebody said, why should I hire you rather than Tata Consultancy? Why should I hire you rather than Infosys? The one point they could talk about is, look at our history, look at us rise. We are here not to make ourselves rise, we are here to make you rise. You, our customer, our community. And they found that in the middle of a sales pitch, their clients would sit and be fascinated and say, tell me more about this, because I want to know how I can do that, how purpose can play out in my company. So today, Tech Mahindra they're the biggest evangelists of Rise. So if I look at that and try to find an object lesson, never force. Let people play around with it. If your concept and purpose is true, and it does indeed help superior returns in the long term, any smart CEO will adopt it.
And very briefly, Anand, can you explain to everybody what are these principles of Rise, and maybe tell us how it affected you personally? So, because, it clearly had an impact on you as a leader. As these things were being articulated, it shaped you in your thinking about the choices you were going to make going forward. So maybe if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I will be briefed here on this, because that was the brevity of this was what proved to be attractive to everyone. We have a Rise manifesto that was done, which is beautifully written. Ask anyone to repeat it, probably not. If you ask somebody even to articulate properly what the short Rise purpose statement is, even there people will fumble. But they remember Rise, and they remember it's about three principles, we called it. We said you accept no limits. Now, obviously, accept no limits in context of the other two, which is think differently. So alternative thinking. So accept no limits, alternative thinking, and drive positive change. So you accept no limits within the context of the other two. Everybody remembers that. So three things. Now, let me be honest, today, Anish Shah, who's just come in, and you wrote the case about him, they're looking at Rise 2.0, and they're trying to find how do we give it fresh momentum. So there may be a re-articulation of the 2 or 3 things they want people to remember. But I know for a fact that since 2007, the thing that has affected most people, including me, is when I'm in doubt, I look at and I say, wait a minute, I'm here to help people rise. I'm here to challenge myself and accept no limits. I'm here to think differently. And I'm going to ultimately ensure that what I do drives positive change. Anybody in Mahindra will remember these three. So brevity is key.
Yes, so excellent. Very well said. I think I want you to tell us about the moment in going to South Korea. You acquired a new business there, and you're thinking Rise. And tell us how you processed that moment and had to make some, difficult decisions at that moment. I want people to understand these are hard jobs.
You're talking about the story I told you about the strike, those
Yes.
strikers?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I'm trying to make a long story short, but Sangyong, before we acquired it, had a very troubled labor relations history. They had a major strike, at which point they were liquidated, and the liquidator, in fact, asked a number of people to leave. So there was a large population of ex-Sangyong workmen who hadn't found jobs, very disgruntled. So I was scheduled to make a visit to the plant for a new vehicle launch. And at that time, they suddenly, about 4 or 5 workmen from that faction that had been laid off, climbed up to the water tower of the factory. I don't know how they got in, and walked up in the middle of winter. And they were there for a month and more. And they had a very complex system of supply chain themselves. People were sending up food for them, the refuse was being recycled, and so on. And they were up there, and it became a cause celebre in Korea. T-shirts were printed of the water tower strike and so on. It was interesting that when I walked in, the management told me the Korean tradition of management is keep quiet, keep your blinkers on. You don't really communicate with striking workmen. These people tweeted to me and they said, Mr. Mahindra, we can see you come into your factory. Welcome. They then started tweeting in Hindi, probably using Google Translate or something. And they were tweeting to me in Hindi and saying they wanted to talk to me and telling me their problems. The management of SsangYong was telling me, please ignore them. They had bodyguards around me. And I just, at that point, had to take a call. And maybe that's why you're telling me to relate this story again. It's about you go back to your principles. If you believe you're about helping people rise, if you believe that you want to drive positive change, you cannot simply sit there and ignore them and say that these 4 people up on a water tank at the dead of winter don't exist. And I actually started a dialogue with them and told them I'd be happy to talk, but they'd have to come down and so on. So I'll stop there, Ranjay, because your question was based on how does this make me act, how does it make people act. And you can see that if you have really imbibed the principles of driving positive change, you will make these decisions in every micro situation that arises. It will help you make the right decision.
One thing on the right decision here, Anand, you mentioned, and I think this is a phrase that gets used a lot, which is actually confusing to some, I think, is the idea that, oh, life is about win-win. You don't have to make trade-offs. There's the magical moment where you can do good and make money at the same time. And we all know that, yes, there are win-win possibilities like microfinance, but not a lot. Some things involve hard choices, where not everybody is going to be happy. There are going to be moments where you have to say, hey, listen, I take it on the chin for the shareholders because this is good for the customer, or vice versa. This is something that I can't do because it'll really be detrimental to our shareholders. How does one think about, like you said, these choices are not easy. They're not black and white sometimes. They're in that gray zone. How does one use Rise as a way to kind of navigate these hard choices?
Yeah, I will have to, in a sense, go back to something I said earlier, Ranjay, and repeat that. And that is that these choices become easier when you apply the right time frame to them. So first of all, let me just reiterate that trade-off, I'll try not to use your cliche of win-win, but the trade-off, let me call it, is a ghost trade-off if you look at the right time frame. It's a fictional trade-off. If you really believe in purpose and really believe in this kind of purpose, then doing the right thing is always something that's going to help you do well and do good at the same time. There is no distinction. What will happen is a short-term trade-off. Let's take a live example now today. You've got Air India, for example, that has had to be commissioned for sending flights out to the Ukraine to bring back Indian students. They've just been privatized. They're part of the Tatas. I'm pretty sure the Tatas are flying those planes out there free. Is it hurting them? Of course it'll hurt them. But they're doing the right thing. In the long run, what will it do? It will build an enormous consumer loyalty and franchise, certainly out of India for them. So again, these choices become a lot easier to make when you look at it over a different time, over a longer time period. You, at the same time, yes, let me be real, that you're not here to only maximize the driving of positive change. Then you are an NGO, and you have to recognize the difference that I'm not an NGO. If I'm going to do it without doing well at the same time while I'm doing good, then you're not a corporation. Then you're a social enterprise, an NGO. Very clear. But if you're a corporation, then you have to do well while you're doing good. So in order to do that, by and large, the trade-offs are fictional if you look at it in the longer term. I'll tell you what worries me much more are the smaller trade-offs. The ones we never will know are being faced by people at very different levels of the organization. If they walk into a government office and somebody asks for a bribe just to get them an appointment with the minister, is the person at Mahindra succumbing to that? Is it inevitable to succumb? So again, I'll stop there, but I'll say that the real problem that consumes me is how do we affect people who have to make these micro decisions all the time? Can purpose affect them in the making and solving and addressing those challenges at everyday micro levels? That I think is an abiding challenge.
Anand, how is your personal purpose? I want to shift to you. How have you articulated for yourself your personal purpose as a person in terms of your life purpose, your career purpose? We are all at that stage where I'll speak for myself here, where I said, okay, I better articulate it for myself. Um, how have you thought about it for yourself?
I'll be honest, Sanjay, that I've never been completely comfortable talking about my core individual sense of purpose, uh, insofar as spirituality has to be a part of it. I'm not one of those who's in let me call it, I'm neither agnostic or atheistic. I believe in a larger force. But I think those beliefs which really guide us and allow us to address that fundamental human conundrum of why are we alive? Why do we persist on staying alive even though we know we have a finite time frame? To answer questions like that, I've always relied on an answer that believes in larger forces. But I think when you talk about those kinds of things, they get trivialized. So I've never been very comfortable talking about that. So I will have to evade that
You
question of
can
yours.
punt that question, no problem.
But I will move to where it affects me in business because it's been asked to me in a different way. People ask me, what is the legacy you want to leave behind as in the company when you work? And I leave it to you. You can try and sort of sniff out what the links might be to a personal sense of purpose. But I've had a very consistent answer to that over the years when people ask me that what do you want to leave behind, and I say, look, if people say that their time in Mahindra, however brief or however long it was, their time at Mahindra while they were here, they were the best that they could be, that they'd really reached their full potential or exploited their potential. If they say that they were the best they could be during the years at Mahindra, I think I will have succeeded. And that's my constant preoccupation because I think everything else follows from that. If you have a team of people doing the best that they can, you are going to succeed one way or the other.
Anand, it's interesting because I've been writing a couple of cases on sports coaches now. And it's interesting in coaching, the great coaches talk about unlocking human potential, taking a performance athlete and taking them to a place where they themselves didn't think was possible. And how do we unlock human potential? So I love the way you described it. I wanted to ask you about another word. We've talked about purpose a lot, which is courage, which I think is a currency very important for leaders to think about today. What does the word courage mean to you? And can you tell us about some courageous leaders in history or otherwise that you have encountered that inspire you to think about this idea even? How do you think of the word courage?
Hmm. Um, well, it's a very difficult question to answer because it brings to mind so many of the more common notions of courage. When you think of bravery, for example, somebody jumping into the ocean to save someone from drowning, that's courage. There are quieter forms of courage, moral courage, and they have to do, coming back to our topic about purpose. If you believe in something very strongly and you have a transcending sense of purpose, individual or your company's purpose, and ideally the same are related and symbiotic, then frankly, you don't ever lack courage. If you have that purpose and you're always aligned to it, then as I've given you some examples, they help you make choices every day, which somebody else might see as courageous. To you, it was instinctive and reflexive. So to me, if I had to relate your question to the topic of today, if you have true purpose, then courage is a consort, is a natural consort of purpose. You don't have to work at being courageous or being brave. And coming to your other question about leaders, well, it's interesting. We all say Indians are mama's boys, and I've constantly talked about my mother being my inspiration. But she was the most courageous person I knew, and I got to encounter from a very early age. She came from a very modest family background, from a family where their means were not great, large family. She was a tomboy. She taught herself English. She taught herself how to ride a cycle. She first became a teacher. Then she ran off and joined Bollywood for a little while. Then left that, became a golfer, became a writer. She just challenged herself constantly, and it was courage in action. So I learned that courage from her. And then when I used to talk about leaders, one of the things she told me was, don't ever idolize any one person. Learn from everybody. If you start making one model of a person that's my role model, you will be restricted, and it will be to your detriment. Learn from everybody. Make a composite of leaders. So every time somebody's asked me, who's your role model? Who is the one leader that you aspire to become like? I say no. I said I was taught very early to make a patchwork of everybody, and that would serve me best. So I can't name any one person to you, but I have to admit that philosophy allows me to learn from everyone.
Yeah. Anand, this is very insightful. One last one. Any parting words on what should leaders of the future be thinking about? We are in a very unique time and space. A lot of technological changes, political changes, and you see a lot of young people starting ventures in India and elsewhere. What advice do you have for young people who are starting their careers and thinking about themselves as a future leader one day?
I'm very, very wary of dispensing advice because, to be honest, even at this stage in my life where I've just become a non executive chairman, I am now in a very intense phase of learning from others, particularly from young people, because they are rewriting every lesson that we learn. They are rewriting the rules of the game. They are rewriting how one succeeds, one ought to succeed. They are the ones educating us even about purpose. And the great resignation comes from a number of young people. So I'm not in a mode where I dispense advice. The last thing I want to be is an ATM giving advice to young people about what to do. But one lesson I would tell them, which I tell everybody, and it's not just the young people, that has served me well, is that keep in mind that if you want to succeed, no matter what you do, you may get quick success and build a unicorn overnight. You may not, but whatever you do, just retain your humility. Just remember that you're not the smartest person in the room. And the reason why humility is good is not because I'm saying it out of any spirituality or any desire to be a Mother Teresa. I think humility leads to curiosity. And if you don't have curiosity about the world, about other people, you will not survive today. There's just too much going on, too much change, too much volatility. If you stay humble and stay curious, you are eventually going to find a way of navigating through all of the turbulence around you.
Anand, very well said. And as always, a pleasure to talk to you. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today and share some thoughts. I would strongly encourage you, anybody who hasn't read the Mahindra case, to read it. There's a lot of information about much more about Rise and how Mahindra really set it up. Anand, thank you so very much for joining us. And I must tell you that again, thank you for all your insights, because I would not have written this book that I just finished a couple of weeks ago without your personal kind of nudges and pointing me in the right direction. So I am very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are very generous words. And as always, pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to ask everybody else to thank you so much, Anand, and to stay around. And I'm going to turn it over to Anjali. You can grab a copy of my book over here for anyone who's an HBS alumnus. You'll see a slide coming up. Not for sale. You're going to get it. Just register and you'll be able to pick one up. It'll be shipped to you. And we'll tell you also about subsequent speakers coming up after this as well that you can grab. Anjali, back to you. Thank you so very much for organizing everything today.
Thank you, Ranjay, and thank you, Anand, for a very, very insightful session. Between the two of you and Anand especially, you explained the link between performance and purpose. I love that phrase. A common right cause can inspire ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And I'm sure that all of you are going to take advantage of that special offer so that you can read more about this link in the times to come. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Anand. Thank you, Ranjay. Have a great evening.